The thing I love about this podcast is the opportunity to talk with youth workers. But when you can talk with a youth worker and a legend, well, it doesn't get any better than that. This is the Youth Worker Daily. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Youth Worker Daily, where we hope to encourage youth workers just like you with tools, tips, resources, and helps so that you thrive in your ministry. This is Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers, the podcast of the Youth Worker Daily. And my name is Jay Hyam, and I am so excited for today's episode. I got to sit down and talk with a good friend of mine. We met a number of years ago working some conferences, and we've kept in touch over the years. And so excited to have this person on the podcast for you. Not only would you get to hear her story as a youth worker, but she is one that has an incredible amount of practical wisdom. And I know today there will be something that comes out of this podcast that you will say, that is a great idea, and I'm going to use that. So let me introduce Stephanie Caro. Stephanie Caro is a author, co-author. She is a youth worker. She is a speaker. She is a consultant and a coach, and she is a friend. And I'm the lucky one to get to call her friend. But we have a great conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So let's just jump in and let's listen together. This is my conversation with Stephanie Caro. Hey, Steph, how you doing?
Doing good. How are you doing, Jay? It's been a while since we've had a chance to hang out.
It has. It's been so we first met was it 2011, 2012? I think it was 2000, actually maybe 2010. The ITT gathering at group headquarters to plan the Simply Youth Ministry Conference one year.
Great memory.
That was my first time meeting you. Well your time meeting me.
Well, that's true. I hadn't learned any stalking skills before that, so I hadn't been stalking you or anything. Yeah, those were good times. That was always just a fun conference to do. A lot of good relationships that came out of that, and the best part of it is that the team of people have really sort of, many of them stuck together over this last decade. There's a special attention we pay to one another when we have posts or texts or have a chance to see each other. It's really been a sisterhood, brotherhood of ministry.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think between Simply Youth Ministry Conference and the National Youth Workers Convention, being behind the scenes really kind of fostered, my desire for networking and connecting with youth workers and really building friendships out of those connections and finding great value from hearing about what's happening in their student ministry, what God's doing with them, what they're learning, what they're struggling with. Like those conversations have been incredible conversations, at least for me over the years. I've learned so much, and it's been great. I reconnected with Andy Disher this past year, and man, just having that friendship, rekindled again has been fantastic. So.
Yeah, and one of the best things that when I look back on 10 years of, and even longer, because you and I met 10 years ago, but some of that...
Gosh, that's so crazy long.
I know. Some of that group began to hang out even in the mid-2000s, so it's been 10, 15 years. Yeah. And one of the best pieces that's a lesson for today is that we're all over the political map, the conservative, progressive, centrist, theological map. We're all in different denominations and different settings, and we so have made it work where those things have just become issues that we didn't pay any attention to with each other.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good lesson learned for us actually today in the times we're in. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to steer it away from
There you go.
that.
That would
So
be awesome.
just because that's not the point of this type of a
True.
podcast.
Do
So,
that.
but
True.
no, I agree. I mean, it really has been an enriching thing for, I think, ministry for many of us to have these connections and these relationships and to be able to set aside, opinions, political points of views, theological points of views, and just come together as the kingdom of God. Ultimately, I mean, we're God's people coming together
Right.
and doing the ministries that God has called us to, and I think that's a win for all of us. So that's a very astute view right there from you. Hey, Stephanie, let's jump into this. So we've known each other for a little while, and I know that before you were Steph Caro, the author, blogger, speaker, consultant, coach, job finder, everything else that falls underneath that list of things that you now do, you were a youth worker. So I would love for us to start this episode of Conversation with Everyday Youth Workers going way back to just who is Stephanie Caro? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And kind of what moved you, what called you, what led you into ministry, specifically this great length of time that you've been working with students?
You know, it's a not particularly exciting story. It's probably how most people landed in youth ministry, but um, my dad was a pastor.
Hmm.
My dad was a Lutheran pastor, and so we kids, we were all just pastors' kids, and dad was a pastor, and we just lived the life. And growing up, I had always said to myself, I'm never going to be in ministry. I'm never going to do that. I'm not going to do any of that. And I started. God's funny how he'll hook you in. I
Hmm.
started at either the age of 15 or 16, teaching Sunday school, teaching the nursery kind of preschool age Sunday school at my dad's church. And, just, kind of did that and led the songs and told the stories. And then a few years went by and I was in school. My dad moved on to another church and I still stayed behind. And by this point in time, a number of years had gone by, enough years that I'd gotten married and we were real active in that church. And when my dad left the church, that kind of left a hole with the youth group. And so I said, well, I can fill in, I can teach a confirmation class. And in my head, I kept thinking, but I'm not going into ministry. I'm not going into ministry. I'm not going into ministry. And that was like 19, never you mind. And, uh, and that was the start of it all. I never had a moment where I said, okay, I'm in youth ministry. I'm going to choose this as a career. It wasn't so much of a career back then, youth ministry. You
No, it
kind of,
wasn't.
no, it was really just whoever the kids seemed to like and would hang out with, and people, churches were just so grateful, and it was just kind of not a career. And there were, for sure, if it was a career, there were no women doing it for sure back in the
Yeah.
80s.
Oh
But
yeah.
I got my first full-time gig in youth ministry around 1989, 1990. And by this point in time, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to keep riding this youth ministry wave because it does seem to fit me and maybe I am called to that. So at some point in time, uh, God had said, this might be what I've called you to do. And so it was kind of a slow fade into it for me, but I'd already put in a decade of sort of doing it.
Hmm.
And got my first full-time job 1989, 1990, and that was it.
Hmm.
Uh, I I served in 5 churches over 30 plus years in full time youth ministry slash sometimes in the jobs there was some children's ministry
Oh
in
yeah.
there, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And um, and the biggest detail that really affected my ministry is that I was always in large churches, large ministries, because that's who could afford a full time youth
Right.
pastor.
Right.
So um, I was serving in this church where I had like a couple of hundred kids in the youth program, which was good then, and it was kind of big and exciting, and I probably had the big old head to go with it. I know you're probably shocked by this, but occasionally youth pastors can suffer from ego. But,
Yeah. It's
you
crazy.
probably never heard that, but it's crazy. And I found myself wanting to explore the ordination process in the United Methodist Church. And so I went and I was started serving in a really small church. I'd gone like from a
Mm.
couple of hundred kids to having this church where there were 9 students in it. I mean, whether they came or not, there was only 9 to connect to. And it was,
Wow.
it was like, I don't even know how to do that math. So I called. I remember talking with a friend of mine, Rick Lawrence, who, well, Rick,
I know
um,
Rick. Yeah.
editor of so many great youth ministry books, editor
Hmm.
of Group Magazine, all of that, a real pioneer and supporter of all things youth ministry. And I remember talking with him, there is nothing out there, Rick, for small church youth ministry. What do we do about this? What do
Right.
I read? And he said, it isn't out there, so why don't you just go ahead and write it? And that was in the late 2000s.
Hmm. Yep. I
And
remember
so
that.
I said, okay. And that sort of started the beginning of my smaller church youth ministry niche in the youth ministry world.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so yeah, and I've actually got like at least 2 of the books that you authored or co-authored.
Yeah. Wow.
Maybe, yeah. So, and I've read them, so they're not just sitting on the shelf. I've actually read them. So,
Well, that's
uh,
better than me because once they're published, I haven't read them. Uh, 'Cause by that
well, I
time,
don't plan on talking about them, so don't worry.
there you go.
Yeah, so you've been in ministry for quite a while. Large church, then small church. And I agree, those 2 things are significantly different in how you approach ministry. I mean, ministry is the same. You're still loving students, so there's a certain level of that's true and acceptable across the board. But yeah, to go from a large church to a small church and kind of rethink how that looks and how you do it. Um, yeah, that's a big jump there. I've always been in small to mid-sized churches. I'm kind of in a church that it's not a huge church, but it's probably the largest church I've been in so far. And thinking ministry on a larger scale, yeah, your books are not quite as helpful.
Right. Right.
I'm back to the bigger books again.
And I get that. I totally get it because some of the principles are the same. I mean, teenagers are the
Yeah,
same.
yeah. Principles are the same. Yeah,
But the algebra is the same, is different. I mean,
it's
the
different.
algebra of it all is different. The interesting thing, especially for consideration of the everyday youth worker, is that the average size church in America is only 76, 77, 75 people.
Yeah, true
And
story.
the average size youth group then is only like 6 to 8 students.
Yeah.
And so what we generally call small is really normal. Uh,
Hmm.
it's just that the larger ministries have more paid staff and louder voices,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah, because even where I am now, like I said, I'm not a large church, but I'm the largest I've been in my career thus far. When Corona hit, we're looking towards the large churches, and we're looking and seeing what they're doing online, how they're reaching students. And I'm like, the stuff they're doing, there's no way even I can do those things. And I've talked with a number of youth workers who are in the same boat, where they just, we it's just not the same realm of ministry. And then
Mm-hmm.
I've talked with some guys that are in some really smaller groups, and they're doing really cool stuff. And I'm like, I'm not sure I can do that either because I'm a little too big for what you're doing, but I'm not big enough for what they're doing. So I don't know, maybe there's another niche coming out of all of this. I don't know, but hey, I jokingly said that you're more than a youth worker. You've moved into the place where you are coaching and consulting and writing various things. You're on staff with Ministry Architects.
Yes, I am senior consultant, which was another thing that I did a slow fade into. I never really set out to be in consulting, but I was doing something in Florida because I kind of came out of ministry out of Florida, and
Mm-hmm.
ran across this guy who said, hey, I'm vice president for this company, Ministry Architects, and maybe you'd like to do some youth ministry stuff with us.
Right.
And his name was Jeff Dunn Rankin, and he said, you ever heard of this guy Mark DeVries? And I said,
Mm-hmm.
no, not really. Don't. I must have been living in a bubble. No, I hadn't really heard of him. Well, that's because that was about 2 years before Sustainable Youth Ministry came out, and then that hit the streets,
And blew up.
and blew up in
Yeah.
great, wonderful ways. And so I kind of slid into that too. And so um, it's been a wonderful 12 years of keeping my hand in ministry directly, but also just, I think I truly love being on the other end of a Zoom or a phone call talking with youth workers, who, just today, for an example, one who said, I don't know if I can balance teaching
Mm.
school and the part-time church job I have. I don't know if I can do it.
Yeah.
School is crazy right now. And just talking youth workers through the practical of how they can make it happen.
Yeah. And that's actually why I wanted to have you on the podcast as we transition into this. Let me ask you this question first before we jump both feet into what life looks like now for youth workers. I want to go back just before COVID hit, just before the shutdown came. As a consultant, one who coaches, talks with youth workers. What were some of the trends, some of the things that you were seeing happen among youth workers just before COVID hit? Like, what were some of the things that were kind of, topics of discussion?
Well, I think I know the answer to this question, but my question to you is, do you want me just to be totally honest and tell you what I think the trends I saw happening were?
I would love to hear your honest. Yeah, go for it.
Uh, I think before COVID hit, we were really, and this won't be any brilliant surprise, but I think we were struggling more in youth ministry than we were probably willing to admit.
Hmm.
Numbers were decreasing, church numbers were decreasing, students were checking out to do other things. Uh, and we were still trying to figure out how we were going to deal with all of that. Everything was different. Nothing's working. I'm trying to have youth group and kids aren't coming to youth group. Do I change nights having youth group? Would it be different if youth group was a different day? And we had a lot of youth workers that I think were scared. Scared, first of all, because they weren't meeting with their kids, which just, feels like how can I share the gospel with kids if I can't spend any time with them? But really, and another thing is, though, I think youth workers, especially those that get paid for doing it, where it's our livelihood, they were a little scared because churches were beginning to not be able to afford youth workers on staff. A lot of
Mm.
jobs were getting partnered up, a lot of hybrid jobs happening, youth workers losing their jobs, churches getting kind of desperate, going, we're not growing, we're not growing. It must be the youth workers' fault.
Right.
Because it's always the youth workers'
Oh,
fault.
it's always, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there's some truth to that because you can't blame the music minister because nobody else can play the organ. And you really want to blame the senior pastor, but you can't because that's trickier. And
Hmm.
nobody wants to blame the sweet old children's director because she's just adorable. And so it's just easier to blame the youth worker for all the church's problems. That may be my cynicism showing, but there's some truth to that. Uh, there, and so the trends I was seeing is we were getting desperate anyway.
That's interesting.
And it wasn't working anyway.
Hmm.
The typical youth ministry, take trips in the summer, have youth group, it wasn't working as well as we wanted to. And so then COVID hit,
Hmm.
and
It was all stop.
it was all stop. It set us all off our pace.
Hmm.
I've heard, so there's a couple of things that I'm thinking of. We've all said, any of us that are leading any kind of youth ministry, my kids are zoomed out. They're not coming to youth group on Zoom.
Hmm. Right.
Well, some are, some aren't, but they weren't necessarily coming anyway.
Yep.
Before the need for Zoom.
Yeah.
So one of the things that has delighted me over the summer, or at least the last 6 months, is, and I bet you've done this, Jay, we've had to pull out some of our old school
Yep.
tricks.
Hmm.
We've started, we've actually had to start visiting kids one-on-one, wear a mask and sit outside in lawn chairs distance. And we've started actually sending kids cards
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
little care packages and doing more one-on-one kind of ministries with students, and it's actually worked.
Yeah. It is. Yep.
uh,
I mean, who would have thought? Like, that's what ministry started out being. Like, I know in I didn't have a youth group, so I don't have a youth worker. I had pastors who kind of stepped in the various roles of mentors, and I had summer camp counselors, and stuff like that. But my wife will continually say, it was my youth pastor who, came to my game. Like, we say this in
right,
youth ministry, but it
right.
was like, they came to the game, or they sent me a card, or they gave me a phone call, or they met me for lunch. Like, that's old school youth ministry. That's what we started out. And you go to any conference and you're going to hear that mantra preached over and over and over again. But I kind of agree. I was thinking you were going to say we've gotten too comfortable in our jobs doing what
Oh
we're doing.
yeah,
Youth
I
ministry's
agree.
become a little stale. And now here we are. We have to figure it all out again. And the
Yeah,
reality is we're just going to go back in time and do what we should have been doing all along.
all along. You're right. I call it the efficient versus effective factor. Efficient is, well, like I'm a mom of 7 kids. And
Mhm.
so efficient systems are my jam because that's the only
Yep.
way you survive 7 kids.
I'm a dad of 5, so I'm in the same boat.
You get it. And so we kind of let that happen in youth ministry,
Hmm.
that we use technology, which I'm a fan of. We
Yep,
use
me too.
social media. And, why call 20 kids when you can send one text?
Hmm.
And some of that is true.
Hmm.
However, it wasn't always effective. And so
Right.
I've got a couple of pictures in my mind from people I talked with over the summer. One is a ministry worker in the Kansas City area. And she said, what the pandemic has exposed for our ministry is that we have found we weren't as effective with the fringe kids as we thought we were.
Yeah.
we found the glaring hole is that there wasn't as much connection as we thought.
Hmm.
And then the other picture, I'll never forget my sweet friend, Gigi Logan. She had a picture taken. She went and visited all her kids, and here she is. Now, this is going to sound kind of creepy, but it was it was sweet. It was all above board. They were in that can't come in, we're quarantining kind of phase. So here
Hmm.
she is in a lawn chair in the yard, and her student was in their bedroom or living room. I don't know what room. Just they were talking through the window, and just and all safe, all safe sanctuary, all of that. But she just
Right.
went around and visited all her kids, and somebody posted a picture of it. And I think those are some of the sweet things that have come out of this, that maybe we shouldn't worry so much about being efficient and go back to being effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 100%, and so I've been at my church just over a year, and taken over the program for student ministry. We've recruited leaders, and kind of January 2020 was our kickoff for what we were trying to establish as the new normal. So middle school, high school, new leaders. We changed some formatting, some timing so that we could be a little bit more we could do our programs a little better for families. And about March, we were just starting to get some traction. Kids were coming out. My leaders were starting to get to know some of the kids. I was getting text messages from my leaders saying, "Oh my gosh, so and so just followed me on Instagram. Is that okay?" I'm like, "Yes, that's okay. Just make sure what you're posting is good." And then one of our female leaders was like, "So and so just texted me. Can I text them back?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's what we're shooting for
That's
here."
awesome.
So all of these things started happening, and then Corona came and shut us all down. And we had some success, March, April to mid-May, doing the online thing.
Hmm.
But towards the end of May, early May, mid-May, we definitely start seeing the numbers dropping. And at that point, my focus to my leaders was, you know what? Just focus on building relationships. We're going to go back to send note cards, send a text message, give a phone call. We weren't allowed to be with our kids. Actually, we haven't been able to be with our kids all summer long.
Sure.
So we've been completely separated, with the exception of one event that we did, and and so our whole ministry at this point has been all about just focusing on those relationships. And we got together about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and start planning for the new year. And again, we're still not meeting in the church. We're still unable to be with students, but the decision was made that we're going to be online through the end of 2020, which is not where I would prefer we start getting back with students, but that's just not where we are.
I get it.
And so our plan was, I sat down and I asked myself the hard question: how do we reach students when we can't be with them? We can't be with them in person. We can't do the events that we normally do. Programming isn't going to work. And whether they're zoomed out or not, social media and being online is not the ideal situation. And so in our meeting, I said, we're throwing it all out the window. We're going to go small groups, and
Love.
we're going to focus on just having small group interaction, which is something to my new leaders I said we wouldn't do until 2021, because I wanted to give them a year, but I said we're going to bump things up 4 months here, and come
Love.
next 2 weeks we're going to jump into small group models, and the leaders will have the options of actually being together with their small groups, because we're allowed to do under 10 in groups. So um, so yeah, we're going full old school, and it's all about intentional relationships.
I love it because because two things that occurred to me while you were sharing that. Number one, it's just you and I looking at each other right now, even though there's going to be people listening to this, but you and I are just having a great conversation, and
Hmm.
I'm enjoying the heck out of it, even if it's
Yeah.
by Zoom, because it's you and I intentionally. And so
Right.
maybe there's something to that as well. Then the other thing that you said that made me think of a positive outlook is whether your small group can meet in person or whether it has to be a hybrid or whether it's completely virtual. I was part of a COVID cohort over the summer. There were 6 of us, And when it came to an end, the schedule end, we were all like, man, bummer. This was really the highlight of our week. So we
Right.
made Zoom work because it was still that small group function. And I think you're spot on with this way of approaching it. It doesn't have to be forever. And then
No.
maybe there might be a point in time where we say, you know, we didn't settle for less. Maybe what we were doing was the better. And uh, I had been seeing the trend of, especially in high school ministries, I had been seeing the trend of more and more weekly small group home groups anyway, with
Yeah.
perhaps one gathering a month for all the groups for connectional relational purposes. And this
Hmm.
just really feels like it's building on that beauty, uh, and taking it and doing what we need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think large churches who can manage the full program and the stage presence and all that, for those who can do that, I think there's still a place for that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think for most of us, hold on one second.
Oh,
Sorry about that. I think for most of us, um, we have to think of ways that we can connect with our students, maybe ways that we haven't been doing all this time.
yeah. And so there are. Are you okay there, Jay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
You
just
don't
a
have
very, very dry office, and no, I don't have COVID.
um, I think that's just. I think it's a delightful plan. One of the things that God's word promises is that God makes all things work together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. And so God didn't create COVID; it just is.
Yeah,
But He will take the messy details and craft something beautiful. And if we just would look at all of this and figure out, okay, this is a good thing. This is something that was sweet. This is something we've learned from this. This was a big
yeah,
adjustment. I think the other thing for youth workers, and this is a little bit me going back to telling you what I think, whether you like it or whether your hearers agree with it, listeners agree with it or not, is I'm from this school right now to get us through the end of 2020. I think it's okay to dial down our programming.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, I
and
was actually going to move us in that direction here, by saying that I sat in on one of your webinars just this
mm,
last week, and I think I'm in the same place about slowing down. So share with us what that looks like. What does it look like for us to be okay slowing things down while we're still dealing with COVID?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I think the greatest piece of my heart is I want to give youth workers relief,
Hmm.
permission, whatever it is they need. Um, and I'm talking, I think, especially to, first of all, talking to those who work full time in youth ministry, or it's a significant part time job where the money, that the income is important to their family. And I've had a few youth workers say that, I'm afraid if I
Yeah,
don't show all this programming, my church is going to think I'm not working and I get fired.
right.
And really, when they talk with parents, most parents don't want all that programming back right now either.
Anyway, yep.
And I've been on the phone with youth teams and children's teams that have said, we really don't want to add the stress of the youth ministry complete full plate back to our schedules right now, because we're barely able to get our kids back in school. One parent even said, I'm not really anxious for my kid to be in another potential hotspot at church when I still got to
Right,
figure out the canary in the coal mine of school.
right.
Uh, and so I don't know that the majority of parents are asking for craziness. I don't even think church leaders are asking for a full schedule. And so the burden is probably one that we're placing on ourselves.
Yeah,
My thought is this: rather than doing mediocre, average, okay, weekly Zoom, hybrid, whatever, what if you did just I mean, you could still connect weekly. Just grab your dinner and jump on a Zoom and talk to each other once a week,
Right. Hmm.
kind of thing. But what if we just did one thing each month from now through the end of the year, but did it well?
Yeah.
And that could be any number of things. It could be some kind of fall event for the students. There'd be ways you could put a bonfire or go to a corn maze, make it totally COVID safe,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
still have a gathering and just do it really well. There could
Right.
be some ways you could do some missional things in November and December, like my food scavenger hunt
Hmm.
for Thanksgiving boxes idea. Just send teams
Right.
of families out to do a scavenger hunt for food for the boxes. And it's still fun, and they still can gather by Zoom and add up points. There's all kinds of things we could do.
Oh yeah.
Make it engaging, still have a discipleship message in it, and yet take the stress off.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It is. It does, and I think that's the key for us now, because we have filled ourselves and we have filled youth ministry with such the idea that it's about programs, and the way we fill our calendar. I know I had the conversation with a lead pastor a couple of years ago, where we intentionally tried to put less on the calendar because we were struggling to see students come out to things. Parents were kind of having to make the decision: does my kid go to the youth group retreat, or do they go to the soccer tournament? Do they go to youth group at night, or do they do a practice and not be able to play? Like, those are real things that parents struggle with. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it was like, and I was a parent, like those struggles were, I was seeing it both as a youth worker and as a parent, because I had kids that were very athletic. And so for me to start saying and intentionally thinking through, less is more, let's not do so much, you program, but focus more on the students. That's now come full circle, and it's exactly where I think I am, at least right now, with my students now. I'm not in a hurry to load up the calendar. We'll have our weekly online gathering, but our bread and butter is going to be our small group leaders
Love it.
being intentional. We're not going to do activities. We're going to encourage small groups to have those backyard campfires, or to get together and hit the local DQ and have ice cream together, masks and appropriate distancing and all that
Sure.
stuff. That's part of it. But it's a lot easier for a group of 8 to do that than for me to organize a group of 50 or 60 to do that.
I love
And
it.
I think the payout at the end is I now have 2 adult leaders who are pouring into 6 students or 8 students, instead of them trying to connect with all 50 at one time.
Um, Jay, so as you were saying this, it occurred to me, and I've been a youth worker a long time, and I even suffered from some of this myself. And so what I'm going to say may sound critical, and it probably is, but it's my own cohort as well, so I
Hmm.
get it.
Hmm.
And that is, I think if we are fighting having the big large gatherings and the big large all the bells and whistles, we have to maybe examine in ourselves why we want
Hmm.
those to begin with.
Yeah.
If it's truly the most effective way to share the gospel, which there are definitely some great big gatherings we go to,
Hmm.
and I'm going to
Absolutely.
miss the National Youth Workers Convention. I love what they're doing with the new virtual concept, but I'm going to
Hmm.
miss like seeing
Yep.
you and all my friends. I
My
get
heart's breaking.
my heart's breaking. I'm not sure I'm going to know how to kick off the holiday season because
Right, right.
it's what I do. However, I think there are some of us that are going to have to look inside of ourselves and
Hmm.
say, were we really motivated by the right thing?
Yeah.
And if the effective thing is to do what you're doing, just more one on one, and if that isn't quite showing proof of how hard you work, then you got to just think inside yourself and kind of look and see what your real motivation was. And
Yeah.
I only say that because there was a period in my career where I was a little bit too full of myself with the big numbers. And I was the ministry everybody was coming to see so they could see what we were doing and why it was so effective and blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
And but pride goeth before a fall, so God made sure I got sent to the woodshed a little bit and learned from that, and I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's what makes these kind of conversations so good, is because from what you've learned, you now speak that wisdom into those of us who are on the other end of this and now are questioning that. We only have a few more minutes left here, and I want to ask two questions. I think we've already hit a lot of the COVID stuff that I wanted to talk about, but two questions to kind of wrap this up a little bit here. So you mentioned earlier that for most of us, we could probably afford to slow down.
Yeah.
But I know the reality of churches. I think you know the reality of churches.
Yeah.
What do we say to the youth worker who has that fear? If they don't see me working, they're going to fire me, because the culture of the church really is that way.
Yeah, I hear that. That's a great question.
I mean, that opens up a lot of possibility there, because I'm like, do you really want to be at that church? Is the first thing that comes to my mind, but it's still a
Yeah,
reality.
yeah, it is a reality. And I had that feedback. I had that question come in from one of the webinars. What if you're working for a lead pastor who wants to just completely go all out?
Yeah.
And so this is off the top of my head, but I had been thinking about this question answer. So see if I can verbalize this and make sense. Hopefully, if you're at a church where the senior pastor, the lead pastor's vision is just to get back in it and go completely all out, full on, you're in a setting where you also follow that and believe that and want that. Does that make sense?
It
Because
does.
we should never be working when we're out of step with the lead pastor. If the lead pastor's vision and process and methods and values are different than us, then maybe we shouldn't be working there to begin with. We really just should be in step with who we're working for. And so if you find yourself thinking, no, this is just all wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, it would make me wonder, is God trying to speak to you about where you're called to serve? Now, that's not necessarily the most helpful answer, but it is one answer and it's one thought. But from a practical standpoint, one safety thing I think you could do, safe for you, is to make sure that you're letting your leadership team know all the things you're doing. And maybe we're not doing that. Maybe we're not letting them know. I had 6 Zooms this last week, one-on-one Zooms. I visited 5 students at a outdoor Starbucks. My
Right.
team is doing this and this and this. And I have seen a number of us that aren't leaving enough of the good old-fashioned paper trail
Yeah.
uh, of what we're doing. And so it might be more important than ever just to be clocking in your contacts and how you're contacting and how it looks different,
Right.
because they're not as evident as the big in-person sessions with lots of kids are.
Right.
So that would be my caution advice right there. Keep track and turn in a tracking sheet.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's great. Last question here, and then we'll wrap things up. You've already listed a ton of great ideas and even some things of encouragement, but I always ask this question as we're wrapping things up. What words of encouragement would you have for the everyday youth worker out there?
Trust God's call in your life.
Mm.
Take it one relationship, one teenager's face at a time. You don't have to worry about being a big ministry. You don't have to worry about any of that. The heart of the gospel being shared with 5 students is just as important as the gospel being shared with 500 students. I
True
was
story.
never in a large youth ministry growing up, never.
Hmm.
Um, Yet God still found a way for people to pour into me, and then hopefully I'm pouring in to others coming alongside me or behind me. And so numbers don't matter. Just trust that you're spending time with students and showing them that they are valued, they are loved by God and loved by you.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is so good. Hey, I'm going to share some things about you as far as contact. I'm going to list the books that you have authored or co-authored as part of the show notes for today's episode. But I also like to end the podcast by asking how can I be praying for you, and then I'd like to pray for you.
Oh, I'd love that. Well, I would say for praying for Stephanie Caro right now means praying for my sweet husband, Steve. Steve's got some degenerative disorder that's really escalating right now. And so I'm in Chicago taking care of one of my kids and need to get back home because he's really struggling. And even though we have care for him, he wants his wife back.
Oh,
And,
sure.
I need to kind of help him see along the next steps as he loses his mobility. So that's
Gotcha.
it for my sweet husband, Steve. He's got to be
Okay.
sweet. He's been married to me for forever. Lord, help him.
Is it okay to say how long you have been married?
We've been married since Jesus performed the wedding at Cana.
All right, I won't push any further than that. I know my place. All right, Stephanie, let me pray for you and for Steve. God, thank you for this time. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for Zoom. We could have these connections and these conversations, and that we are able to connect and encourage one another. God, first off, I want to pray and give you thanks for Stephanie and her many years of ministry in youth ministry. The way you've used her to touch so many lives, the churches that she served, the families that she cared for and loved on, and the way, God, you have revealed yourself, your son Jesus, to her students and have called them into your service. I pray now for this ministry she finds herself in as a writer and as a coach and as a consultant, and God, all of the wisdom that she was able to gather from those years of being in the church setting. Lord, now she can come and share that with those of us who are in the trenches of student ministry. Lord, those words, that wisdom, it's what we need. And God, I pray that today's conversation, Lord, for whoever's out there listening to it, that something today was said that they can use and they can benefit from. And maybe they're the ones that are listening that just need to hear that it's okay to slow down. Let that word translate into their heart and into their ministry. God, we lift up Steve and we pray for his ongoing health issues. God, we just pray that your comfort and your peace would be there, Lord, that you would continue to give Stephanie and Steve all of the joys and all of the delights of their relationship, their marriage, their friendship, and the ministry that you are doing through them and with them. And so, Lord, we thank you for Stephanie and for the work that she's doing. Just pray, Lord, that you would continue to allow her to be fruitful, because we need her wisdom and we need her expertise. We give you all praise and honor. For it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Stephanie, this has been a true delight. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here on the podcast. I really appreciate your wisdom, your friendship, and your words of encouragement to youth workers.
Thanks for asking. I'm really honored. I appreciate it. Grateful.
Okay, so that was my conversation with Stephanie Caro. And yeah, I hope that it was both encouraging for you and helpful. After the podcast, as we were wrapping up our call, Stephanie said to me that what she had hoped to be for youth workers in this season is one with practical help, practical ideas, practical help, practical encouragement. And I think that came through in the interview loud and clear. So much good ideas, so much. I mean, just it was good stuff. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate Stephanie taking the time to be on the podcast and to share a little bit of her story, as well as sharing kind of some of the things that she's seeing in youth ministry, and especially as we deal with youth ministry in this season of COVID. We keep circling back around to this topic of ministry in COVID, but I still think it's a relevant topic. I think it's something that we need to keep talking about because things are changing, and youth ministry is changing, and how we do youth ministry is changing a little bit. And I think when we uh, kind of boil things down, I think the one thing that doesn't change is the need for youth ministry, and maybe what youth ministry is all about, and that is relationships. And so hopefully at some point today you heard some things that were helpful, some things that were encouraging, and maybe some things that are going to make you to sit back and just think a little bit. I know we both, Stephanie and I, both got real excited about making the shift in ministry to more of an old school, intentional relationship building, where we are engaging students in one-on-ones, where we're focusing in small group settings, trying to get to know our students and build those relationships and that trust with our students. I know it's something that we're looking forward to this season in our ministry. And by the sounds of it, it's something that maybe we all need to kind of be considering. How are we doing at actually building relationships with our kids, focusing on who they are, being intentional in their lives? So yeah, hopefully this podcast has been a good one for you. Want to again say thanks to Steph Caro. She is just not only is she a friend, but she really is a legend in my mind. She knows so much. She's got a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom, and I am always thrilled and delighted to listen and learn from her. And this podcast has been a great opportunity for me to do that. I want to encourage you, if you want to reach out to Stephanie Caro, if you want to make use of her wisdom and her skills. Like I said early on, not only is she an author and a co-author, she has dozens of blog articles out there. She's a coach, she's a consultant, and so she is available for you as someone to consult and coach. And the way you can reach out to her, if you go over to the companion blog, there'll be a link in the show notes here. But if you visit us over at theyouthworkerdaily.com, click on the link for this episode. We have provided ways for you to connect with Stephanie. So we would encourage you to take advantage of that. I know she would be thrilled to spend a little time talking with you, and just being an encouragement for you. I also want to highlight some of the titles that she has. She has 3 books that have been published where she is either the author or the co-author. And I want to share those titles with you. These are not in order of publishing. They're just kind of how I'm sharing them with you. But the first one is a book called 99 Thoughts for Smaller Church Youth Workers. Doing More with Less. That's a book that Stephanie wrote, published by Simply Youth Ministry and Group. You can look that up. And then there's two other books that she has co-authored. The first being Thriving Youth Ministry in Smaller Churches, Secrets for Cultivating a Dynamic Youth Ministry. That is published also by Group, Simply Youth Ministry and Group. So look that one up. And then the third book where you will find her name attached is Smaller Church Youth Ministry, No Staff, No Money, No Problem. I have read all three of those books. They are awesome. They are super helpful, and I would encourage you to look them up. You will actually find a link for all three books right there on the companion blog for this episode. Click on them. You'll be able to order them from Amazon. And of course, when you do, because those are our affiliate links, we get a small percentage at no additional cost to you. And so I would say if you order that way, thank you so much. Really appreciate you supporting the podcast in that way. Stephanie's got another book that's due to come out relatively soon. And as soon as that does, you'll be able to find it not only on other youth ministry publication houses, but you'll find it right here because we'll be downloading that book and reading that as well. And so you check back here as soon as that book is released, and we'll let you know. My thanks to Steph Caro for her taking the time to come and be a part of today's episode. And my thanks to you for taking a few minutes out of your busy day to join us here on Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers. I want to encourage you, look us up. theyouthworkerdaily.com. On that website, you will find blog articles, vlog episodes, additional podcasts, and all sorts of resources available to you and your ministry. So I encourage you to go and check that out. And then follow us on social media. You can find us at YTH Worker Daily. That's at YTH Worker Daily. We use the same handle for all of our social media. So whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, look us up. Join our community, follow along, be a part of the conversation, because not only are we sharing things, but we're looking for the great ideas that you're sharing, and then we're sharing them as well. That's going to about do it for today's episode. Hey, if you would like to be a guest, this podcast is all about the stories of youth workers, the way God has called you into youth ministry, and the things that he is doing in, through, and with you while you serve faithfully in your student ministry. Being a guest would be really awesome. We would love to have you as a guest. I mean, after all, if there's no stories, there's no podcast. So we need to know you. We need to hear your story. And so go over to the website, theyouthworkerdaily.com, click on the link for the podcast, and then click on the link for Be a Guest. Fill out the short form, and I will be in contact with you about setting up a call and getting you on one of our future episodes right here at the podcast. So come, share your story. Let us know what God is doing in your life, in your ministry, and in the lives of your students. We'd love to share that with other youth workers. All right, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. My name is Jay Hyam, and you have been listening to Conversations with Everyday Youth Workers, the podcast of the Youth Worker Daily. We'll see you next time.